The FBI run by Kash Patel and Dan Bongino, they're making some moves here, and they're making some big moves probing into sort of what I would say were cases that were closed but were never solved. Unsolved mysteries, if you will. Remember that, Will?
Yes.
Remember Unsolved Mysteries?
Great show.
Great, top-notch show. So Dan Bongino said, I love Unsolved Mysteries, and I want to bring it back. I'm going to bring back 3 different key unsolved mysteries from Washington, D.C.
And this is what Dan Bongino said on X over the weekend about this update. And it says, shortly after swearing in, the director and I evaluated a number of cases of potential public corruption that understandably have garnered public interest. We made the decision to either reopen or push additional resources and investigative attention to these cases.
The biggest one for us being who leaked the Dobbs decision a few years ago when Roe versus Wade was overturned. Remember, it was leaked, 3 or 4 months before the actual decision. I think it ended up being, 95% the actual decision. There was some, some tweaks here and there, some grammatical changes, some citations, but for the most part, it ended up becoming very real. And then there's other FBI things that they're going to be investigating as well. Not necessarily always to find some sort of extreme criminal intent, which is the big question here. Does that play into this, as you said? But maybe so the American people can rest a little easier knowing that our team can go in there and get this stuff done, that we actually can figure out. If you could figure out so many of these things, why were these left open-ended? And that one to me is the big one. Of course, there's one related to January 6th, and then another one about some of the illegal substances were found inside of the White House. I think that one to me is I don't care at this point. Like President Trump has a new administration in town. They won. Who does that affect? I don't know if that matters really to our people. Doesn't matter to me personally. I think the January 6th one is interesting because at least continues that discussion. But the big one to me is this, because the Supreme Court of the United States is supposed to be held up to a very different standard. And the standard was really violated. I can't remember another time where it felt that vulnerable than in that moment. Because remember, after the decision was leaked, that is when you started having all of the death threats that happened to the more conservative leaning, the ones who voted to overturn Roe. You had people in front of their houses. That was before the decision was made. A lot of people thought that was to pressure to switch, because they can, to switch their opinions. That was the unleash the whirlwind, as Schumer said. So that's not uncommon. What was uncommon was this pressure being put on them because of that leaked document. So maybe we'll get some answers.
Other than actually getting back to the work of the FBI, they are trying to rehabilitate the image of the FBI. And when you look at these 3 cases on their face, they should have been something that federal law enforcement could get to the bottom of very quickly. Obviously, the Dobbs leak decision was handled by the Supreme Court Marshal, not by the FBI. Now, I don't know. They haven't publicly said whether or not there was coordination between the Marshal at the Supreme Court and the FBI to use resources, but it was spearheaded by the Supreme Court Marshal, so their own in-house law enforcement. The White House case should have been, with all of the security cameras and monitoring and security at the White House, should have been something that law enforcement could have uncovered pretty easily. Well, and also the January 6th one, they had all the footage. They had all of this. This was the case of where there were alleged pipe bombs placed around D.C. On January 6th, and something that they were able to track individual people who were in the vicinity of the Capitol and go to their home. Right. But someone they had footage of placing a pipe bomb in D.C., it's this big mystery that's never been discovered. I see a lot of the comments coming in, and a lot of the comments aren't necessarily we care about who did it. We care about why it was covered up and why it was not investigated further. That, to me, is a bigger question. Right.
That's the real question. You're right, listener, whoever said that in the comments on YouTube. You're right. Because, again, what's it going to matter to find out who brought these substances into the White House? It's not. But you could go into why was it covered up? Who covered these things up? Who covered up the situations? And who leaked these documents? Those are the things. And not only who leaked the documents, why wasn't it found out?
This could set up a conflict between the judicial branch and the executive branch. The judicial branch says we did an investigation. We did not find who the person was. We have an idea of maybe how it got disseminated or something like that, but we don't know who the person was. But we conducted our investigation, case closed. The FBI now saying that they are going to launch an investigation could set up a fight between the two independent, co-equal branches of government that you're seeing also in the courts right now, where the Trump administration's arguing foreign policy is our domain. And the courts should not be issuing preliminary injunctions that are nationwide, blocking foreign policy decisions. Many of these aren't what they would say a matter of interpreting a law. These are policy decisions, and you're litigating this. So a judicial branch should stay out of the executive branch. I'm curious how the Supreme Court responds to this announcement that they are going to investigate this, if they cooperate, or if they say, like when they had the marshal do this instead of using other law enforcement, saying, this is our domain. Our opinions are our domain. How they get disseminated is our domain. It's none of the FBI's business. Yep. Y'all go worry about statutes and laws and protecting the country, but stay out of our lane, because that does set up an interesting juxtaposition of them making a similar argument that the Trump administration is making in court that will end up before them.
Well, I hope it's more like when some of these organizations, these departments said, Elon, come on in. We want you to come and doge this organization. That's what I kind of hope the Supreme Court does, which is like, come on in, Bongino. We'd like to know the answer to this as well and hold some people accountable. We don't feel like it got taken care of appropriately. Maybe you're right, though, Will. The Supreme Court, though, they can get a little ornery sometimes. They can get a little protective of their own justices, of their own judges. And
I'm not saying that that's not without merit, right? But that also does raise an interesting question about what is currently before the court about the executive branch saying this is our domain.
Yeah.
And we're going to find out.
We know that someone who was never caught, who was never exposed, who was never held accountable in any way. And again, it doesn't even necessarily mean going to jail or even paying a fine, but it could mean losing your job because you leaked sensitive material that was not ready to be public, private correspondence with Supreme Court justices, if you will, to the media. And that, of course, caused death threats to go upon many of the conservative justices, people standing out in front of their houses, protesting in front of the Capitol, saying to unleash the whirlwind on these people. And no one was ever held accountable. But now, thankfully, we have someone like Dan Bongino, like Kash Patel there saying, you know what? Maybe we need to reopen this. Now, I see some comments saying, I don't care. Let's move on. We got bigger fish to fry. But as you said, Will, the FBI said we can do both.